Hello, it's Jack, tutor of Attention Magazine. Welcome to Crucial Listening, the podcast where I speak with musicians and sound artists about 3 albums that are important to them. My guest this time is Robert Curgenven, an artist based in Ireland, born in Australia, and according to his website, his work emphasises physicality, our embodied response to sound and its correspondence to location, air, weather and architecture. All of these are in play on Robert's new 3 albums set, which encapsulates so much that I already love about Robert's work. It's called Beyond Enclosures, comes out via his recorded Fields imprint on September 17th. And again, to quote Robert, the 3 albums that comprise this set, all at their heart concern air and the attendant interpermeability and fluidity of volumes. One thing that's always grabbed me about Robert's work is the palpability of airflow, the sense that you can feel the direction of airflow, how harmonics illuminate how air is bristling and quivering and pulsing. One of the records within this Beyond Enclosures set is based on a piece called Bronze Lands. And there are in fact 2 versions of this piece that exist. So one within that set, which was recorded in Sydney, and one which was released standalone just very recently, which was recorded at Cork Midsummer Festival. And both versions of this piece vary drastically due to the different conditions, the different pipe organ, the different time of day, the different air temperature, humidity, all of these things when you're working with something as delicate as air and illuminating it, how Robert does, lead to drastically different results. It was so nice to talk to Robert. We've been in touch on off for quite a few years now. It's fabulous to get down to talking to him about these 3 excellent records. So as always, head over to attentionmagazine.co.uk/crucial listening. If you're listening to this in the browser, by the way, you can grab it as a podcast if that's easier. And head over to recordedfields.net for more info on Robert's work and to pre-order this wonderful set, if you so please. Okay, that's it. Thank you for listening as always. Hope you're all doing well. This is Robert Curgenven on Crucial Listening. Hello, Robert. Welcome to Crucial Listening.
Hi, Jack. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming on. So we're here to talk about your 3 important albums. Before we get to those, I'd like to talk about your new 3D set, which is coming out September 17th. It's called Beyond...
3CD in 3D.
What did I say? 3D?
3D. It is indeed. It's actually 4-dimensional, but we'll come into that later.
And it's also on compact disc, 3 of them. It's called Beyond Enclosures. It's coming out via Recorded Fields, your imprint. So to begin with, could you give me a little introduction to each of these CDs and then also a bit about what unifies them as well as a single set?
Yeah, for sure. So the first CD is Bardo long form for 3 turntables, pipe organ and piano. It was originally an installation that I made in 2011 when I was living in Cornwall. Consisted mainly of abusing some vinyl for a couple of days and recording a lot of little snippets of vinyl abuse and interspersing that with silence. It was an installation that was designed to run on infinite loop and never repeat. So I've since interspersed it with some pipe organ and piano, and it mainly works with overtones and sort of aleatoric textures from the turntables. So there's 5 different layers, and the idea is that it creates this Bardo state where you hold 2 contrasting opinions simultaneously from listening to it. You both expect things to stay the same and you expect things to change. So both can't be true, but in this piece they are. So through this suspension, you notice that you become okay with both, that things will suddenly arrive or they might suddenly leave, or different layers might suddenly change, and that it sort of has an internal logos that makes sense. The installation was originally shown in like Berlin, New York, Ireland, and a 23-minute version, so a completely different version, was released on long form editions in 2020. So that's the first CD. It's 60 minutes long. The second CD is 45 minutes or 43 minutes exactly. And it is from a different installation that was produced in 2019 as part of the Shape platform. I was one of the artists, 48 artists on that platform that year. The platform consists of 16 festivals that work together and share artists for their different festivals. Includes Club Transmediala, Unsound, Ultrahong Festival, Today's Art, and a bunch of other festivals across Europe. So this was commissioned by the Ultrahong Festival in Budapest and shown in the Mutu Gallery there. And I made recordings for 10 days across Poland in a tour just prior to arriving in Budapest. I used a similar technique to the 2016 album Climata, which was in 15 of James Turrell's Sky Spaces. So basically I used 2 tone generators and a small speaker to move air in and out of an architecture. And in this case, it was buildings that were incepted between 1961 and 1989. And we would now refer to them as post-communist. So it was working with this idea, the translation of all that is solid will melt into air, but the correct translation of the original German sentence is that all that is stood and is standing will vaporize, and that the standing bodies that they refer to, the architectures or the estates or the corporate entities that form the state as it exists. So essentially, these architectures were an embodiment of that concept, and it's using the air to draw what's outside into the building, and it creates a phasing sound, and it gives the impression that the sound's coming from everywhere. That was originally a 6-channel installation that sort of filled the gallery, and now it's 5 pieces on a CD. And there's a whole bunch of liner notes explaining more about that with the CD. And the third one is Bronze Lands, or Tolta Creua in Irish, recorded live at Sydney Festival in 2020. It was a performance on the Sydney Town Hall 64-foot grand pipe organ, which was the largest when it was built in the 18th or 19th century. There's larger in the Southern Hemisphere now, but it's 20 meters high, longest pipe's 20 meters long, and it's 30 meters wide. Across the front of it, the Centennial Hall, which itself is 80 meters long. So quite an architectural experience again. There was 300 people lying down, 300 people sitting upstairs. So something that's not likely to occur again in the near future, and happened in January of last year, just before the present situation all began where it is now. So coming out of a PA, which had 12 18-inch subwoofers, was a piece that is in a different tuning to the pipe organ in the town hall. So it's essentially a piece for 4 hands, where I'm playing an equal temperament pipe organ, and then the different tuning, there's creating overtones and beating frequencies between the two. So I released the Irish premiere recently as an EP, Tolta Creua, live at Cockman Summer Festival, which was from 2018. This is the full concert of the 2020 festival event, and it's been nicely mastered by Antti Sakarisario, and we've managed to capture a lot of the bass from the original performance. So you can imagine the amount of air coming out of a 64-foot pipe, and as well as all those subwoofers. It's quite a physical experience. So it's a single track, 50 minutes, and it's designed to be listened to as a concert. It kind of goes through 6 different stages that take you somewhere, and The structure is drawn on the movement of tin and copper across Europe during the Bronze Age at the very beginning, which was also a period where language started to change because there was the beginning of private property, because they were creating artifacts that could be traded for, like bronze was quite valued. It could also be used to build weapons. Weapons can be used to protect empires. Then you start to get stratified class-based society, and like a whole bunch of things were changing around that period. So it seemed like an interesting thing. And the tin would often come from Cornwall and it would travel to Mycenae. So the journey actually follows the reverse. It goes from Mycenae around Italy, up the coast, across to the Rhone, then up towards the Seine, out towards Rennes, and then around the south of Cornwall, and ultimately ends in Ireland. So there's 6 passages in this 50-minute piece, which covers roughly a 4,000 kilometre journey. The beyond enclosures that it's referring to, the cover actually has a polar bear in an enclosure in the zoo in Sydney that was taken in the 1950s, and has the audience of the Irish Premier of Tochacroa sitting in front of some speaker enclosures whilst themselves enclosed in the architecture of the cathedral. So there's sort of a series of meta references to things that, enclose us. And there's also perceptual systems, but equally it's about the architecture and how each of these pieces has an architectural element to it. And it's working with air, like mainly volumes of air, and how they move and how they can interpermeate volumes of architecture in the same way. So it's kind of thinking outside the box, in a fancy way of speaking.
So I want to ask a question about each of these specifically, because that was an awesome introduction to each of them and the main themes, I guess, that arise in each. So with Bardo, let's start there. You mentioned in the notes this being a spatial and temporal suspension, which yes. I think maybe you touched on when you were describing it as to why that phrase is applicable here. Certainly rings true for the listening experience. I think the temporal bit in particular, there's a lot of moments of very reduced sound where it's, I don't want to say silent, but it kind of feels like it at the time, but you then re-emerge into silent, yeah. But you re-emerge into sound, and it's almost got this hypersleep quality to it, where there's a sort of ellipsis of time where you almost feel like you could have missed hours when you come back up again. But I'm intrigued from your side, when you use a phrase like spatial and temporal suspension, what are you referring to there within the piece?
Okay, so also trying to advance the idea of context and duration and location, so that these different recordings, like the piano, the pipe organ, the turntables, are all made in different locations, that they all have different sort of spatial vectors in terms of how the volumes of air were moving around in them when it was recorded, and that you're experiencing this shift in context, so that, yes, there is the durational aspect, that there's a cumulative experience, that the things that you heard before shape what you hear after. So also the periods of silence, there is some very quiet bits in there, so you can't tell if it's silent or not. Uh-huh. So then you start listening to the silence as much as you're listening to the sound. And if you're listening to it on speakers, you'll hear the sound outside the room as well. So then the room that you're sitting in, or if you're sitting outside, becomes a frame for how you hear what's happening around you, so that you start to become increasingly attentive to where you are. So the spatial suspension would be equally that you occupy the contextual location of the recording, sort of a non-space that exists in the digital or analog form, depending on how you're listening to it. And then you're in the real meat space of where you're sitting, so that you're sort of shifting between both, but you're occupying both simultaneously. And then the temporal kind of flows out of that.
The next one's specters. You mentioned there that it's employing a process that you used in Climata, which yes. I loved. I'm wondering, and hopefully I've got the order of events right here. So Specters was put together, and do you say in 2019?
Yes.
Yeah, awesome. So what was it that you took out the entire experience of doing Climata start to finish and ending up with a product that fed into how you approach Specters? Like, did that bring with it a reevaluation of how you wanted to approach it, or was it pretty much taking what you did for Climata and applying it to this new context?
With Climata, I was following a hypothesis and wasn't 100% sure that it would work, but I was fairly sure that it should work. And it wasn't until we were halfway through driving across Europe and we actually tested some of the recordings, I think up to the 7th or 8th Sky Space. We were in a kitchen where we were staying that night. And like first thing in the morning, I just grabbed a couple of speakers and popped a couple of recordings on, and then there was the eureka moment of it works. But the sound, yeah,
so jammy.
Yeah, well, the physics suggested that it should work. I tested it in one Sky Space and it functioned, but I couldn't be 100% sure that the material that I was collecting would actually bear out into something interesting. So like there's a saying, I studied economics originally, but that economics or economic analysis is like driving a car with the front window and the side windows blacked out, and all you can see is out the back window, and that's how you guess where you're driving. So you're only got statistics that are 6 months old to try to determine the direction of the economy. Similarly, I only had the recordings that I'd already made. Fortunately, they weren't film, and I had to get it developed, and there's the whole period of waiting for rushes and that sort of thing. But I think with a film, it's a similar kind of process, that you're following a directorial idea and hoping that it bears out with what you get on film. Yes. So the bass was all recorded fairly late in the day for Climata. With the approach to specters, I felt that I could strengthen the process and go a bit harder at it, for want of a better phrase. So it's a lot denser, it's a lot thicker tone, and that I wasn't just using art installations that were in cities, the country, like that were worth €1 million. These were a series of buildings that had links to historical significance from a particular period in a particular region, what people would refer to as Eastern Europe, although, yeah, it's like Asia Pacific. It's not a homogenous area.
Right. Yeah, of course.
So trying to work out how something in 2019 would have any significance to what had happened 30 years earlier. I guess it was also that it was 30 years since the end of communism officially, when the Berlin Wall came down, but then the future didn't arrive in an evenly distributed state. So it happened at different points throughout the eastern areas of formerly Soviet-occupied Europe, or what is now Europe, regarded as the EU. So, yeah, I was sort of pushing the idea a bit harder, and I had a clearer idea of how best to employ them, these acoustic resonators, as rooms, and that there's a much broader variety of architectural forms. So they weren't either all round, square, or ovular, that they had a whole bunch of different attributes to them this time round. And all of the bass was recorded in the gallery at the end. So the bass is sort of draws together the pieces as they were made. And that was all done in a single take right at the end. So I was sort of pretty deep inside the process by then. And the mastering approach is quite different on this one as well. So, hopefully it all bears out. But I thought that I've been particularly interested in some of the aporia within the all that is solid melts into air statement for quite some time. And my politics is interested in some of the people who were theorizing around those kind of things. I thought it was interesting to do the entire project with only referring to post-communist, but never referring to the thing, because it's quite a numinous form. Like, what exactly is that form? Did it actually exist? There's the argument that communism, said the word, is only fully possible after completely saturated capitalism. So it could be argued that it wasn't a full communist revolution because it hadn't gone through that complete limit of growth and the change from there. So, theory and praxis are quite different things frequently. So, I was trying to draw out a different hypothesis, and it had a far more social element to it, and that it was about creating an arc that takes you through these different social constructs as well. There's a lot more internal architectural noise. Like I was recording in architectures within architectures for specters. So, that there's the two statements that it draws on, that eingespenst, what was it? There's a ghost across Europe, and that it's a spectre and that it translates best into spectre. So that there's a spectre haunting Europe, and I feel that at this particular moment, there's evidence of that in a variety of different ways, that there is a big political change, and that all that has stood and is standing will vaporize. And so that what would we do without these bodies? And I guess that there is also within the architectures, you can hear the bureaucracy and that constructed them and designed them, that there's a lot of very busy noises in there. They're hard to move through the way that you need to take goods through public areas, and that they create interjections of sound. That there is a kind of bureaucracy that you can hear in there. There's this utopian socialism that is at the heart of it, like this monumentalist kind of element, but that there's also how people occupy and inhabit these spaces. And I guess that that's a lot more the focus. So a different kind of philosophy, but focused equally on habitation and what architecture can provide for us.
And then Bronze Lands. So as you mentioned, there was a version of this that was released live in Cork. The version that's included, beg your pardon, in Beyond Enclosures is from Sydney.
Yes.
So I'm just digging into both presently at the moment. From your end, what are the differences, either in terms of your experiences as a performer or in terms of the end item as something you listen to? What are the ways in which these two versions diverge that warranted them being released as two separate versions of the same composition, effectively?
Yeah, it's arguable that the piece is going to sound quite different every time it's performed, because it's working a lot with architectural acoustics and overtones, and pushing the systems quite hard. You get a lot of harmonics from the building. The cathedral that we used in Cork houses a 32-foot pipe organ. The organ's sort of off to the side, but we put the sound system on the altar and at the back of the room. So we were moving the air backwards and forwards through the room from front to back. So the audience was sitting inside of that, and the recording itself ended up with quite a dense, thick tone, which belies the 8-second reverb in the room. So like the architecture had a very strong role in there. It was also recorded in summer, so midsummer. So it was quite warm in there, and air is a real factor in how sound moves. So, pressure, humidity, temperature. It sounds quite different in a cold room. So sound can travel up to 10% faster between -40 and +40 degrees. And the humidity is a more humid room, sound travels faster again. So the recording for Sydney Festival, we'd spent 36 hours in there rehearsing, and, there's 127 stops. We used about 110. There's about 50 stops, 53, I think, on the St Finbarr's organ in Cork. So very different registrations, very different sounds. What's coming out of the PA is propagating into the room differently. Sydney Town Hall is a long sort of rectangular room, so the sound's propagating very evenly from the front of house. So it's quite dry as well. But it was the middle of summer again in Sydney when we performed the piece. I needed a registrant, so she had an 11-page script pulling out the stops.
Wow.
It was we developed that in 2 days. Grace Chan is an absolute star. Like,
Wow.
I'd say I'd want to start from this point at 23 minutes in, and she would set it up. So it was a pretty intimidating couple of days, but it worked. But to finish the illusion, during the rehearsal, we did a performance. There was like 10 people in there. And when I sat down to begin the performance that evening, 80 tons of people had come into the room. There had been a storm. It was significantly hotter and significantly more humid. By the time I got to the third or fourth part of the piece, I had to actually play it significantly faster, because the way the overtones were propagating into the room,
Wow.
when I was playing it at the speed I'd done in the afternoon, it just wasn't working. You could hear that, it's like trying to shoot an arrow or like trying to like clay pigeon shooting. You're trying to hit a moving target. I could hear that the overtones weren't meeting, that the piece wasn't getting the particular effect that I was after. So I had to actually play a lot faster. And so the piece actually came out quite differently. So I've got to react to the conditions, the volume of air in the room. There's also the pipe organ, where it is in the room, the reverb of the room, the audience. So it's kind of like a quantum experience. You change any of these things, and by attending it, you change it. So it's arguable that there is very different overtones present and the piece is largely about melodies constructed from overtones. I actually looked up how My Bloody Valentine recorded the keyboards for Loveless in an attempt to understand how you could get that kind of sound. It didn't have any bearing on this, but that was a research wormhole I went through down the 2 months of preparation for the piece in 2018. So if you're not focused on producing, closely mic'd sounds which have very clear fundamentals and then produce the overtones, then you're going to get it's a lot more numinous. It moves in a different way. What the microphone hears and what the audience hears and what the performer hears are all very different things as well. So I think that there's a number of differences between the two pieces, and no, I'm not going to release every version. I thought that it was an interesting sort of case study of here are the differences between these two.
Absolutely.
And the piece sounds different. So hopefully that bears out for a listener.
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of like a conceptual unraveling after that point, isn't it? The listener knows then that any subsequent version will be different. So and you've made the point.
Yeah, and if there's more performances in the future, which I hope there to be, then people will go, oh, I recognize that this is neither of those performances, that this is a third thing, but I recognize the form of the piece, so that there's the form and then there's the content. That the score isn't explicitly written down, but I roughly know the notes to play, but it's going to be about producing different sound pressures to achieve a certain outcome within a given duration, so that each part goes for a certain period of time, and I'm trying to achieve a certain density of sound pressure that produces certain overtones within that time.
Well, this set is amazing. I've been really enjoying it. I haven't had loads of time with it, but I can't wait to dig in more, Robert. So people should definitely check it out. I don't know whether or not it will be available to pre-order by the time this goes out. I think this comes out early September.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah,
excellent.
The pre-orders begin from early August, and
Great.
There'll only be 300 copies, so I'm fairly keen to get them out to homes and out of my home.
Cool. Okay, great. So your 3 important records. So one question I like to ask at this point is about how you thought about the term important when coming up with your list. So was there a particular framing?
Oh God, I've worked in record shops over the years. I've worked for music magazines. Has all come up later when I finally turned 18 and stopped looking like a child and had to be led into venues, couldn't be bounced anymore. I think I saw more than 60 bands in the first summer in Sydney. So
wow.
Things that were important. I mean, I've been playing music for 40 years now. Yeah, music itself has been very important to me for a long time. It's probably the only continuous aspect of my life, which has had a lot of different changes, but not even formative or not even the best albums necessarily from these artists, but that each of them are interesting because I had no idea how they were made when I encountered them. And I was reflecting on this last night, that there is a real discipline to each of these albums. The way they each hit you in completely different ways. They're very focused.
Yes.
So I guess I've learned a lot from that. I'm a little less fluffy now, a little bit more focused myself. But I could have chosen any, an album by Helmet, for example. I guess it's also that, a number of their albums are really good. Meantime's amazing. The B-side of Strap It On is great, but the production is really very round on the top end and doesn't necessarily do the album justice in the way that it could. I could have chosen lots of albums, but these ones felt significant in a way, and that I probably put a lot of effort into trying to understand what they were, or they turned up at a time when it showed. Sometimes you encounter art that gives you permission to do things, you hear something or you see something and you go, wow, you're allowed to do that.
Yes.
You know, like this is acceptable.
Yeah.
So, or you know, someone got away with it. It's like, okay, it's on. So,
Yeah.
that within the field of human endeavor, that this is an acceptable activity, and it doesn't mean that it doesn't encourage innovation in and of itself. But sometimes you feel like you're moving without a map, and occasionally things turn up, and you go like, what's beyond here is completely accept. You know, go for it.
Yeah.
Have at it, as they say in Ireland. So, yeah, for better or worse, I chose What by Folk Rab. In case you didn't feel like showing up by Ministry, a live album from 1989, I think it was. And The Grand Guignol by Naked City. Some of them have produced better albums before or since, but that they were all significant or important to me in different ways. And I am aware that it's a total sausage fest. And those that know me personally know that I'm not necessarily the most masculine person in the world. But yeah, I appreciated what they held. I was thinking of including Eliana Radigue's Kume in there. I have a great story for how I encountered that. It was very significant. But there was a period when last year after the Sydney Festival performance when all I could handle listening to was What. And that album is very interesting because it sounds different every time I've played it. It sounds different quietly to loud. It sounds different on every single system. And I think that in itself was quite a door opener. And I still have no idea how he made it.
Right.
But,
yeah.
So, you know, I guess a lot of people also wouldn't realize that it's not metal per se, but I was into a lot of very heavy music, which I guess explains the slightly physical obsession I have with sound. So for better or for worse, let's plow on with these three.
So which one do you want to have at first? We've started talking about Folk Rab. Do you want to start there, or is there an order that you have in mind which makes the most sense?
We'll talk about the Grand Guignol first.
Okay, great. So why is this album important to you?
Someone gave it to me. So I was trying to work out, so I had to have been 18 because I was at a gig, a venue that I went to quite frequently, Vic on the Park, which I think is still going in Sydney. They used to have afternoons there where they'd have 7 death metal bands play in a row. And even if you were really hanging out for the 7th one, by about number 4 or 5, it's like you're just trapped in a bull ring. It's like men walking around going, ooh. And it smells like a combination of smelly boys and girls' shampoo because all the boys have washed their hair. It was like a Morbid Angel gig. It smelled like a girl's bathroom. It was hilarious. All these men thrashing their hair around. But they had a lot of indie rock stuff. Yeah, so like a lot of unusual music. Over the years, I'd seen a wide range of music there, but like I was hanging out in the inner city in Sydney a lot more. I grew up in the suburbs in Sydney, very, very boring. John Howard, the former Prime Minister, was our local member, got voted in 2 weeks after I was born. I come from a very conservative area. So there wasn't a real roadmap for... I didn't have an older brother that was like, hey, listen to this. So
right, yeah.
I would discover things somehow, largely from record stores because this was still the early 90s, I think, late 80s, early 90s. And I would find music from record stores and also by going out to see as much music as possible, and maybe I'd make a connection to something else. But someone who I'd become friendly with, she said, here, I think you should listen to these. And, CDs in Australia were expensive. They were probably like $35 each because they were Japanese imports even back then. So it's like, oh, someone's entrusting me with music that I don't, you don't have a mobile phone. You didn't have an email address for them. I wasn't sure where she lived. It was basically like, you'll need to bring it back to me at another gig. So there was a nice sort of nominal community around. Like I was also... found it very hard to talk to people I didn't know, so I got to know her. She was an interesting person. She ended up photographing Primus when I interviewed them when I was 19. So cool. That was interesting. Yeah, that was pretty bizarre, like a band from overseas came to Australia. So she gave me this, and I'd previously enjoyed the first Mr. Bungle album. I was obliquely aware of John Zorn, but I didn't really know that much. And this album, it's kind of like people go looking for the answers, or they look for some unifying thing that ties a whole bunch of things together. And then when they find the answer, they can they've encountered all these questions. This is like being given the answer in a certain way, straight up, and then you find all the questions that it answers. So Fred Frith, Bill Frisell, first time Fred Frith has played bass apparently, Joey Barron, Wayne Horvitz, Yamatsuka Ai, and a few other people perform on this album. From there, you can go into New York 80s avant-garde and improvised music. You can go down a country music wormhole if you follow Bill Frisell. You can go through English experimental music if you go into Henry Cow following Fred Frith, and a whole bunch of other possibilities. Joey Barron is exemplary in every situation I've ever heard him play drums. The Boredoms, if you go down Yamatsuka Ai's discography, which they toured Australia. I was very excited to see them. I totally understood what the word psychedelic meant after that. Again, another kind of numinous concept, and I'm like, oh, yep, that's what that is. They had like a huge rotating slide projector at the back, so like a massive lava lamp of color. So that made a lot of sense. But literally, this album, like the first Naked City album, is quite good, but this one is astonishing. So the first track goes for 20 minutes, the next 8 tracks go for 20 minutes, and the last 31 tracks go for 20 minutes. So it's a bit of a statement. Yeah. And these guys clearly know what they're doing. Like, there's areas which are so loose but so finesse and so tight that there's no mistakes in there. It's very impressive. The opening 20-minute piece manages to cover a whole bunch of different influences without being pastiche, and fluidly moves from like blast beats to like sort of a music concrete minimalist spooky ambience in a way. Like, it effortlessly moves between genres, and it follows that Carl Stalling approach of having the wood block, the pulse tying everything together. So he was also the producer on the Carl Stalling project, and I really enjoyed the background animation by Tex Avery and the Carl Stalling and later Fritz Freeling music on the Looney Tunes. So I'd also been listening to a lot of Carcass, Sepultura. I enjoy Napalm Death, but not a major fan. Godflesh, and then also a lot of jazz, a lot of trad jazz, big band sort of stuff, noise music, pop music. Like, I'd been going out to see a really wide variety of music, and then also a lot of classical music like Scriabin, Bruckner, Messiaen, and the second 8-second section of pieces includes 3 Scriabin covers, a Debussy and a Messiaen piece, and I have never heard a better version of the Floating Cathedral by Debussy that's on this version. It just floors me every time. It is elegaic and majestic at the same time.
Is this a record that you still listen to now?
Yes, sometimes. So they released The Torture Garden subsequently, which is all the short pieces, and Funny Games by Michael Haneke,
yes.
was it?
Yes, that's right.
I was excited in the opening minute of the film when they played 2 Naked City pieces, and I'm like, yes, right, you have my full attention now. And that film is brutal. Like, the original version, not the remake with Tim Roth, I think it was, but the original version is just like wrong. And the ambience, it's so tense, but it's also so precise at the same time. So I guess that this Naked City thing is similar. Like, the way they rip through these songs, it's like, why play a great riff twice or 4 times when you can do it once and get on to the next one? So and great track titles like Perfume of a Critic's Burning Flesh and Jazz Snob Eat Shit. So yeah, I would still put that on sometimes. I haven't listened to the first track a lot of times, but the Scriabin, Debussy and Messiaen pieces and the Ives piece, I would still put on and listen to as enjoyable music. So it's shaped. Yeah, I was like, how is this done? And they never toured Australia, but when I saw a video of it, I'm like, right, they did this all live. It's not cut together from tape. So
right, yeah.
Yeah, and like how it's basically like a massive fader kind of thing, like people fading themselves in and out, and that they're following this click all the way through. So Speed Freaks has 28 changes, I think, in about 40 something seconds, or maybe 30 something seconds, and they just rip through this piece. But you listen to it, and the entire thing works off a click track, the same as the Carl Stalling stuff. So he would write each section, not frame by frame, but he would find a pulse that unified the whole thing, and would sometimes ask for a few extra feet of animation to be done so he could finish a cadence. And he would work within the Warner Brothers catalog and quote, like the lady in red when Bugs Bunny is in drag, that's quoting a Warner Brothers track, I think. So there's this encyclopedic knowledge of multiple genres to create a new genre and really expansive understanding of music. So I guess as a late teenager who'd given up playing as many notes as quickly as possible, you know, after all the hair metal sort of stuff of the 80s, then like this combination of sort of industrial and I've been listening to a lot of Strategies Against Architecture too by Unstürzen and Neubauten as well, and that's really in there. Like, but it is a very 80s kind of album in a way. I think it was 89 or maybe 1990 that it was released. I did end up buying my own copy and returned Marie her copy.
Nice.
But I was just impressed that like someone who, for all intent and purpose, I had no direct social connection to, was lending me something that was clearly of significance to her. And it did end up opening a lot of doors. So, it was an important album to me because it combined a lot of things. And they're all exceptional musicians who can play regular music or whatever kind of music they want very well. It's something that I would never try to pull off myself, but it connects a lot of dots, like so many.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned there about the pulse driving things. I think one question that I wanted to put to you as someone who's listened to this a lot is, it's one thing to mash together a load of stuff. I mean, I've seen them talk about the fact that they were listening to Ornette, they were listening to then Slayer, then Stravinsky, and this was a means of assimilating that holistic listening into something. But that's all good and well, but how do you do that? And not it sound like a performative
the Ornette covers album is amazing.
Right. Yeah. Oh, did they do an Ornette covers album?
Yes, they did do a covers album. It was Tim Byrne in the left or the right channel and John Zorn in the other channel. Mark Dressner, I think, playing bass, and Joey Barron and Mick Harris both playing drums simultaneously.
Wow. Oh, cool.
It sounds like a cannonball full of musicians being shot at a staircase and coming down really fast. But they play the head note perfect. It's unbelievable. And then the extemporization, the development is like out of control. And then they come back on their head like Spy versus Spy. It's fantastic. Again, something I'd encountered around the same period. I ended up hoovering up a bunch of John Zorn stuff around then, and then haven't really listened to much in the last 15 years. That album in particular is probably the best that I've heard in terms of consistency from all of those musicians. It's very precise. And it doesn't just move through it all like bit of this, bit of that. Mm-hmm. They very clearly know what they're doing. The fact that it's all written down as well, I'm like, oh, wow, that's a lot of writing. But it's a pulse, and that there is sort of like, you know, you can do the same sort of thing with overtones, have something that moves with a consistent phase through a piece. I guess there's something similar about Eliana Radigue's Kume or Vergrub's What, that the way the overtones evolve, it's just happening on a far more geological timescale than the, you know, a couple of beats per second or beats per minute.
Great. Well, let's go to your second important record now, Robert. Which one do you want to talk about now?
Ministries, In Case You Felt Like Turning Up.
Lovely. So, why did this one make the list?
It's an assault. So I've found out, I've gone down significant research wormholes of this period over the years. So I enjoyed Lard, which is Jello Biafra with Paul Barker, William Reflin, I think. and Bill Raflin and Al Jorgensen. It was recorded around the same period, it turns out, in London with Adrian Sherwood in the building as the Land of Rape and Honey. So there was this point when they went from being a sort of gothic darkwave band, like Twitch, that sort of era, and then they suddenly got really heavy and hard and a lot faster and incorporated machines in a different way. Apparently, they owned a Fairlight synthesizer. They'd gotten a massive... So there's the Wax Tracks documentary I highly recommend. Explains a lot about this whole period and their involvement with it. But during this period in London, they had the Fairlight. They didn't know how to access the second page, apparently. So they would have loops that would go for 8 or 16 bars and not change. So there's this real monothematic focus, like total boys music in a way. And they also, Mr. Mackay from Fugazi was in the building at the same time, so they recorded Palehead, and apparently the phrase that kept coming up was bulk record. So they were sleeping across the road, if they were sleeping at all, recording a lot. And the material for Land and Rape and Honey, Lard and Palehead all came out of the same sessions.
Wow.
And yeah, so then suddenly, like, there's this huge... So I found a connection this morning between Paul Barker and an Australian band, Models, that did a bunch of very big singles, I think, in the 80s, and also Dean Mentor, who went on to become guitarist for Faith No More. So somehow Al Jorgensen and Paul Barker found themselves at the center of so many things. They were just very active, and the Chicago Wax Tracks label is part of that. So again, a whole catalogue that I have realised retrospectively became quite important because a lot of it turned up in Sydney through various record shops. But in case you didn't feel like turning up, is the live recording. And I've since found out that there's a lot of overdubs. But the video, like, not a Blues Brothers fan, but this whole idea of building the cage between the audience and the band, they start and they just go. There is minimal chatter between songs, even though some of them are from different performances. But they are just like a well-oiled machine. And one of my favourite rock and roll facts is the second drummer, Bill Raflin, went on to become the drummer for REM.
Yeah.
So the Chicago smallness. So it's just like all these really strange things going on. But like 2 drummers, 3 or 4 guitarists, 1 or 2 sample players, at least 1 bass player, and they just like go. And also the Fix documentary about Ministry is hilarious as it is wrong. So much drugs, so much bad behavior.
Yeah.
When things go bad, when bad things attack, the 1995 tour. I saw them perform on that tour in Australia, and at the big day out, a couple of 10,000 people or more. It was a total assault. And again, drawing back into this physicality of music, like there's a huge frequency distribution, a lot of bass, a lot of everything, and it's very driven. So there's a couple of tracks on this live album that don't 100% do it for me, but someone explained to me, talking to my wife, she was saying, well, it gives the audience a break between, everything coming at breakneck speed. So it's not like going to see 7 grindcore bands in a row where you just feel tired at the end. There's some slower bits.
Yeah.
But they just open, I think, what's it with? The Missing?
The Missing, yeah.
And it's like, we're not taking any prisoners. We're not here to mess around. And it just sounds, again, like completely monolithic. It's a huge sound. And then the audience is going absolutely nutbar.
Yeah. The other record, actually, you mentioned to me by Ministry, which I think was in the mix for this, was Psalm 69.
Yes. Again, politically very important, like 1991 Gulf War, so much stuff going on. And seeing that live was just like, oh my Lord. It was, quite a spectacle. And again, very well-oiled machine at that stage, that they were no longer a dance band, that they were very much like an industrial metal band, but without collapsing into the kitsch of industrial or metal.
Yeah.
So, and great riffs.
Yeah.
Like really catchy riffs. I have no idea how they recorded that album. It is such a big sound. And the story of how it was made and how they wouldn't let the Warner people listen to it, and they just baited them endlessly and would spend, it's like Kubrick and 2001. Like, nope, you don't get to see it till it's done.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think that it's interesting. It's like the story of Van Halen getting paid $1 million to do the US festival in 1984 by people who went on to become big with Apple computers and all that sort of stuff. But of that $1 million, they spent $800,000 on backline. And so that wall of amps thing, that's where that came from. So it's like this absolute sense of hyperbole.
Yeah.
And not in the Fast and the Furious, which is like hyperbolics. It's like really that you're pushing the limits of what is possible, but it's still possible. So those sort of albums, like they were massive sounding, and that they ended up being quite popular in the mainstream as well. So, but in case you felt like turning up, it's just like it's unrelenting. Whereas Psalm 69, it's got a bunch of different gears on it. But yeah, the video, I think, is also what makes it with In Case You Didn't Fight. You know, I think I had a copy on VHS back in the day, and I encountered that when I was working at HMV, I think in, again, 91. So they were getting rid of, I could get cheap CDs, and they were getting rid of a lot of vinyl then, because apparently vinyl was going to die as a medium.
Fancy that.
So yeah, it was part of discovering a whole bunch of great stuff. And I guess that there was some good stuff being imported into Australia, and keeping in mind that there was really only the 7 major record companies in Australia, which is now just 3, and some imports. So there wasn't the huge range of independent music available that you get in, you know, Europe and America. Like there was a lot of very active Australian independent labels, and it's not to discount that at all. And like, you know, Waterfront Records and Phantom Records and Red Eye and all those kind of labels and shops were doing amazing jobs of presenting new music very well. So you could go in and find stuff and walk away with something new. But Australia on the whole, and particularly suburban Australia, was very mainstream. So if you didn't hear it on the radio, you didn't see it in person, and you didn't find it in a record shop, unless someone told you about it, it was hard to kind of dig up new stuff. The internet wasn't a thing back then. You know, you could order tapes, but you needed to know where to order them.
Yeah. I guess that's why, like, when you mentioned that girl gave you the Naked City record, it's so exciting to bond with someone over music when it's that difficult to come across, right? It's almost... If she's wired anything like I am, you're kind of doing yourself a favour by giving someone else the opportunity to have that experience and feel connected to another listener, instead of just bursting out of your own head because you're so excited about it.
Yeah,
but nowhere to put that energy. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's like giving someone a seed packet, knowing that there'll be that many more plants the next week.
Yeah,
rather than just you're the. It's not very like it's opening gates rather than gatekeeping, and I guess that's exciting.
Yeah,
and you know, working for some of the street press magazines in the 90s as well, seeing people's excitement, and also the gig guide and like the different gig listings, and like getting the word out about new bands or engaging with that process was quite exciting, but also seeing how it functioned within the corporate music industry, so that there's the excitement, but also the jaded, like, right, so this is the line.
So on this Ministry record, so you mentioned that these records showed you what was possible in some fashion. I think you maybe have covered it with this Ministry one, that it maybe just the sheer assault of it. What was it about the Ministry record that said, okay, now you can do this, this is a legit way to go?
The way it combined samples, I mean, like God, between the Butthole Surfers, them, and a couple of other bands, I'd practically seen Blue Velvet before I'd seen Blue Velvet. Like a whole bunch of those, like, you know, still seeing movies where some of those samples turn up. But like, sure, people have been doing samples and music, and, you know, I'd gone to see a lot of grind and death metal bands and that sort of stuff. But like, there's also a lot of space in the music, like Thieves live. When I saw them, I saw them 2 nights in a row in 95. They were probably, I think they were about 140 decibels. I was sitting upstairs at Selena's and had my fingers in my ears because I was about, 10 meters away from the front stack of the venue, 1,000-person venue. And when I took my fingers out, I felt myself being blown back. It was So we were watching the mosh downstairs. They had a strobe on during Thieves. There was literally people flying across the top of the mosh. I was just completely looking at my friend going, what is going on? Like, it was a different gig where I saw someone stage dive off the second floor, but like people were up for it.
Oh, wow.
And yeah. So it was like, there was some pretty unhinged behavior going on then. And it was also super hot. Like, I think I saw at Soundgarden there the previous year and it was raining from the roof. It was so hot in there. Like, you couldn't see in the mirrors in the bathrooms. It was so full of steam. So like Sydney summers got pretty hot, but like someone surfing across the top of the crowd during Thieves, and they're playing it like, you know, millisecond precise. And then you see someone, and then when the strobe comes on, every flash of the strobe, they're meters away from they were seconds ago. And there's multiple people flying around. And yeah, it was just like the idea that the spectacle was everyone engaging with the spectacle. Mm-hmm. You know? That there was no one place to look. And then you've got like 7 or 9 different people on stage playing, and it's just sort of like very clearly in control that they were just like riding the beast. Yeah, it was just impressive. So yeah, I guess the permission of sort of like the different densities of music, different ways of constructing melodies, different ways of building something that can be intimate or like small or monolithic second to second, and to make something big without it necessarily being bombastic. You know, trying to avoid bombast, I think, is quite a good thing, and for a lot of things that I enjoy, because a lot of things can collapse into that sort of, you know, overexpression very easily. So it kind of kept a check of itself. But I guess the precision with which it was crafted, yeah, and there's some very funny moments in there as well. So, you know, at the end of Stigmata, fuck me, fuck you, fuck everyone, fuck the church, fuck church, just goes off on one. So, yeah, it's got a little bit of everything for someone, or a little bit of something for everyone.
Great. Well, Robert, let's go to your final important record then. So,
What?
Fog Rab. What? Tell me about how this one made it into this 3-album list.
I think I encountered it for the first time. Lasse Mahog from Norway had posted it on Twitter. And I'm like, what? What's that? I haven't heard it. Put it on. So I grew up playing Hammond. We had a Hammond organ in the house, and it sounds like a tone generator, but it sounds like a Hammond. It's kind of got that richness that you get with the Leslie when it's carefully controlled. The Leslie's a rotating speaker on the side or in a separate cabinet to the Hammond. And with the Hammond, you can, through the drawbars, you can control the overtones. It's very similar to a pipe organ. So I came to realize my fascination with overtones had actually been linked to what I've been doing as a child. So I'd always, you know, I discovered Jimmy Smith quite late in the day, but like that big kind of expert use of the Hammond, that you can build very nice, big, fat textures by having the drawbars not all the way out, but most of the way out. And it's based on using the flutes for the pipe organ. But the way the piece sort of like old tools, how they'll have a knurling effect on them, like a sort of a diagonal diamond-shaped cross-hatching. It's a particular machine effect that's done on metal. The way the tone unfurls in the opening minutes of What is kind of like this knurled effect. Like, the longer it goes, the more you're noticing that it's not actually just one note, that there's a lot going on with it. And if you have a window open, then you start to hear the phasing effect moves the air in and out. So like years ago, I got obsessed with this phasing effect and I was like, what's that? And then now I'm like pretty much like, let's do a whole album with just that. And lots of bass, lots of really low bass. And so it's just like, hopefully it'll work in some regard rather than just being something which is a little bit too much of one thing. But I've played what super quiet. I've played it blisteringly loud in a white room with the sun burning into it, so we had to have sunglasses on, and it sounded like guitar feedback coming off the walls. It was crazy. We couldn't even work out where the sound was coming from or what it was anymore. It assumed completely different dimensions, and I guess that's the thing with all of these albums. They scale well. They sound good quietly and they sound phenomenal up loud, but they sound different.
Yes, yeah.
So this is sort of working with like filaments of sound rather than blocks of sound. And the way the piece unfurls over the 75 minutes, I think it is, there's sort of 2 or 3 main sections to it. There's pulses in there. Like, I don't even understand synthesizers very well. Like, I had some crappy Yamaha ones in the 80s and some Roland ones and a Korg, but I don't know much about synths really. So I don't really I use simple first principle stuff like tone generators just for like the way they affect physics. But clearly Mr. Rubb has some understanding about the device that he's using, that he's managing to milk a lot out of something. So it sounds like pulses, but it might just be beating frequencies. And the more I listen to it, the less I understand about it, or I have hints on like maybe he's doing this at this point. So
yeah,
it's also very calming. Like, you know, it's got that very minimal close focus like a lot of Richard Chartier's early work does, and then it sort of expands out into there, and it's both calming and then you can deal with the unsettlingness as it sets in.
Yeah.
So I still listen to it a lot. It's a favorite for the car.
Oh, really? Oh, interesting.
Oh yeah, it's total road trip material.
Because then I guess as well you're getting engine noise nudging into certain frequencies and stuff too.
We have a 3-cylinder, so it's very quiet. It's less than
very nice. Okay.
No, we've isolated the engine. Got a lot of acoustic material going on in the vehicle. When I drive Toyotas. No, it's I'm not driving a Land Cruiser anymore. It's not phenomenally loud. But like if you have the windows open a crack and you're not driving too fast, then this album sounds incredible.
What do you know about folk Rav? I tried to look up some stuff. I couldn't find much.
Yeah, have listened to bits and pieces of some of his other pieces. He doesn't seem to have done a lot of material like this. I feel a bit like I knew this interview was coming and I didn't prepare on this front. But the little bits that I've listened to they don't have this same singular focus that this does. Like I heard some brass pieces, I think maybe an organ piece, I'm not sure. I guess that's the other thing, like important albums rather than important songs, like an album being a collection or a series of things put together that convey a certain mood, like a photo album. So I chose this as an album because, you know, there's some Ligeti pieces that completely melt my head, some Scriabin as well, but there's not an album that I could pick. And I felt like that these kind of sit adjacent to all of the interests that I have rather than this is the thing that I like.
Interesting you mentioned Ligeti, actually. I think Folk Rob was taught by Ligeti. That's the one bit of info that I managed to pick up. I hope that's right. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Right. I only just recently discovered that Max Planck was a student of Helmholtz. So it's like, that makes a great deal of sense as well. So, so Ligeti's Harmony Studies #1 for pipe organ. There's one particular version. It's on YouTube. I can't pronounce the guy's name properly, but amazing. Just, I encountered it after I was getting back into pipe organ after a significant break away from it, and it does everything that you'd want to achieve in this completely etheric way.
Taking a tangent there, I'm intrigued. When you came back into pipe organ after some time away, what were the factors that you can point to that dictate why that happened? What brought you back in again?
I've got really frustrated with equal temperament and that everything just ended up sounding like different versions of the same thing. Like, I know that there's lots of different styles of music that you can play it different ways, but organ tends to have a certain, Jimmy Smith plays it differently, Booker T, but church music tends to have like this big, heavy, lumbering sense to it.
Mm-hmm.
And, you've got the bass. So I guess that's informed how I play a lot. You've got the bass with your feet, chords with the left hand, it's not piano, and then something else with the right hand. So I was more interested in harmonics, the notes between the notes. And at that age, I was just like, these lessons aren't going anywhere. I think I'd reached teacher's grade and I'm like, what would I want to teach about this? And then got interested in music, had samplers, had other keyboards, could do different things with music, did radio for years. And then after doing all this stuff with like turntables and overtones and architectural stuff, I played organ again for a bit and was playing with the stops more, and then realized that like, okay, yes, this is how I can control the sound and produce what I want. It's not a new idea by any means. Like Keith Jarrett, I'm not a huge fan, but on Spheres, he does this technique, but it's all done live. Same with Clamato, like I tend to record individual strands, one thing at a time, not knowing how it's going to combine into the end, and it becomes a gestalt. So like the intention imbued into each part of the recording hopefully informs that end product. It's like if you were to design all the fittings for your house and then design the house, like it's going to be a house that fits the fittings.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So like Corbusier's approach or Wittgenstein. So, not that I know that much about Wittgenstein's house, but yeah, so you're aware that there's parts, but you're also focused on a whole. So in England and also in Cornwall, was able to access a lot of old pipe organs, and so then started recording on them and was like, this is what I'm after. It's got a similar kind of character to the other material that I've been making. And also holding down multiple notes. I was still obsessed with cluster chords as a kid, but now like multiple bass notes, then you get rhythms, and it becomes about how that organ's tuned, and then the beating frequencies between the notes, which is different for each organ. So I guess also you're going to have regional variations for bronze lands because each slight difference in beating frequencies, which is also going to be borne out by the changes in the weather, is going to give it a slightly different character each time. So it was the Ligeti's Harmony Studies #1. When I actually saw the score for it, I realized that they're venting the pipe organ. So then not enough air can get in. And the more notes you play, the less sound comes out. I kind of took the inverse approach for bronze lands. I found that when I was working with this non-even temperament stuff from the tracker action organs, it didn't really matter which note I chose. They were all terrible. So, and I didn't want it to be arbitrary. And I was after something quite specific. And then I realized that the more notes I played, the more overtones there were and the more beating frequencies. So if I changed notes within those notes and also pedal noting, I'm changing the inversions of the chords, it's producing more overtones, and then the two halves sort of finally came together. So, that you're going to get slightly different chord. I'm playing like 12-note chords manually, not holding things down. Like sometimes one finger's playing more than one note, and the density of this huge non-amorphous mass of undulating beating frequencies, when you change certain notes within that constellation, you're creating melodies from the notes changing slowly, but you're also changing how different notes relate to each other to produce additional overtones. So I spent a lot of time in St. Finbarr's working on that, and then sort of like a realization is like, okay, so this is something I feel like not many people are doing. This feels something unique to me. Like I don't want to make music that other people are making because they're already doing it better than I am.
Right, for sure.
So why reinvent that wheel? So for better or worse, I felt like that was an interesting direction to go in. And then Sirene was like layering up similar ideas like this, but it wasn't tied to any specific tuning system, and I could make quiet sounds very loud. So you're kind of getting right inside the acoustic production of sound via the movement of air from a pipe. You're hearing all the elements of that. So, and I also, believe it or not, I got very self-conscious playing in front of people. So it had been, I'm not going to say how long, but a significant period of time since I'd last performed in front of an audience when I did the performance in 2018. So I had to deal with certain things about myself. It helped that the audience couldn't see me because I was behind a whole bunch of stuff where the organ console is.
Yes.
But, I guess that our disciplines help us kind of engage with those parts of ourselves so then we can become less underconfident and maybe kind of just like present it as it is rather than needing to be overconfident,
It sounds like there's a lot that you could still dig into with pipe organs. You've mentioned so many possible variables and your journey up until this point. Do you think
there's a new thing coming?
I was going to say, yeah. Okay. Nice.
I'm particularly interested in structure, like the piece, Clamata, the way that the 6 different modules fit together to create, it's similar with Bardo that you've got all these modules that come together to create a structure that changes every time. So it's the relationship between the different elements. That I'm working on something a bit larger. And again, I guess once you've kind of plumbed the width and breadth of a technique or a possibility, then you can approach the structure more coherently.
Yes.
So starting work in the next year or over the next year on a new piece that will hopefully be enjoyable, interesting, worthwhile, but also engage with some unusual pipe organs and result in performable work in the future. So I thought it was at least worth releasing Bronzelands now. Who knows if we're not going to be allowed to hang out in groups, and organs tend to be in very specific places. And for that piece, I also need a PA. So I need like a good deal of electricity and lights and all that sort of stuff. So trying to develop something new that can work in different contexts, but like at least Bronzelands is out there now and I can, I'd love to perform it some more. Mm-hmm. But I also would like to work on this new stuff. So there's a few new things in development and that's one of them. So it's an idea that I've actually been kind of working on, came up with about 15 years ago, and I think I finally worked out how to do it. So, a year in the country has yielded some time to think about stuff on long walks around the bog, which is not the toilet. It's a large anaerobic area of water upon grass and similar plants.
One final question for you, Robert, which is, you've mentioned with the folk rap record, for example, you've listened to it in loads of different contexts. I'm wondering if you have a particularly fond means of listening to records in a dedicated way. Like at the moment, is there somewhere you like to be or somewhere you like to go, a setup you like to use in order to conduct a full appreciation of a particular record?
As loud as possible on a massive sound system.
Yeah, that would do.
I don't know, like I was lucky to have done some work with this big dub sound system, which is in the front of Beyond Enclosures, and what we used in Cork. And the bass is phenomenal. It was built by hand, modelled on the Mungo sound system from the UK. And music sounded great on it because I've been working on a lot of music over the last year. I haven't listened to a lot of music. I tend to enjoy it where I can. I haven't even been able to set the turntables up properly in this new house. But and listening to stuff on the Genelex here in the studio, it tends not to be a great deal of fun. And I mostly tend to listen to music in the car. We have a car now. But often I just work with silence. So sometimes we've had a turntable set up in the house and it's just like some nice speakers and you can sort of jump around to it in different rooms. I guess with the folk rap thing, it is interesting because when one releases music, one lets it out into the world, like releasing an animal. It's not going to necessarily come back and cook you dinner and say, thanks for all of that. Like it's going to go out and live its own best life. #blessed. But when you release music, you like hope that people have a subwoofer so they can get these secret frequencies or the audio Easter eggs. And I guess that listening to what made me realize that there is kind of hope for releasing music, because if it sounds different in every setting, that there's as many different audible variations as there are settings, so that everyone's going to hear it differently. And if someone digs into the music, that they'll get all of those rewards themselves. So, and I guess even modeling stuff for streaming so that it can sound decent on a phone or on laptop speakers is a challenge, that there's still enough intention there and enough intelligence in what comes out. So, yeah, I mean, there's lots of different ways. I am really missing hearing music on a big, like, sound system in a big room, and hearing. Was listening to something recently by Brendan Doherty from Berlin. He put a great EP out recently of some of the works that he's been doing with Meg Stewart. And one of the tracks, I was like, yep, this is the bass line that would be moving through the room. You know, like when it's not just a bass line, it's something that would move backwards and forwards through the room very architecturally rather than just up and down. Like, it's got a real spatial element to it. And I'm like, I could imagine being in like a club and hearing this, and it'd be like, yeah, it's something that makes you want to move as well. So I think that there's a lot of different contexts to hear music, and it serves different social functions, and it has different physical rewards in each context. What I enjoy, what I make are often quite different things as well.
Well, Robert, let's end it there. Thank you so much. This has been awesome to talk through your 3 important records and your own music as well. So cheers.
It was crucial that we made this conversation work for all the technical difficulty.
Yeah.
Thanks for taking the time, Jack.
And to everyone listening, we'll see you next time. Goodbye.